Bonjour, good morning, good afternoon, everyone, from wherever you are joining us from. Welcome and thank you for being here today at the Knowledge and Learning Commons. We will wait a few more minutes for people to join. And in the meantime, could you please tell us in the chat, where are you joining us from today? My name is Kotlar, and I work at the United Nations Library and Archives at Geneva for the Commons. The Commons is our space dedicated to informal learning and knowledge sharing on issues of professional developments and multilateralism. Today, in collaboration with the Division of Conference Management at UN Geneva, we are going to cherish our mother language on the occasion of the International Mother Language Day, a special day celebrated every year at the UN and around the world. So I can see that many people are joining us from Geneva, Munich, of course, which is great. India as well. Thank you. Cool. Okay. So before starting, just a little tech check to make sure that everyone feels comfortable. We are using MS Teams meeting for today's event, and you can see on the screen more instructions. To interact with you, there is a chat section enabled to the right of your screen. You can submit your questions throughout the session, and our team will assist you. We will also have a Q&A part at the end of the presentations. We hope you have many questions for our speakers. Do not hesitate to write them down in the chat section or keep them at the end for the Q&A part. You will be able to directly ask your question by using the raise hands feature. And for everyone's respect and comfort, we will please ask you to make sure to be in a quiet space and area before raising your hands and be given the floor. On the screen is the link for a resource guide online that we have prepared for this session with additional materials that it could be useful to you. You can also find this link in the chat, and we are also recording the session, and the video will be available on our website tomorrow. But before starting, we are very curious to know more about you. We would like to see on a word cloud the diversity of languages from the participants we have today. And could you please tell us what is your mother tongue? We would like you to participate via Mentimeter and enter the code you will see on the screen and the QR code as well. You also have the information in the chat. For those who are joining us just now, welcome to this session dedicated to celebrating our mother language. We have a quick question to ask you before starting. Let's all go to menti.com and enter the code you can see in the chat now. Thank you for your participation. I can see there are already some languages appearing on the screen. So we have French, English, Estonian, Chinese, Latvian. Oh, super cool. Thank you so much for participating. We can maybe wait a little bit more to see what other languages we have today. Cantonese, Hindi. Super nice. So I can see now that the majority of our audience has English as their mother tongue. Super. Spanish, Australian, Italian, super cool. We have a very nice word cloud full of colors. Great, thank you very much. Keep Mentimeter near you, as we will have another question to ask you in a few minutes. But today we are pleased to have with us Kira Kruglikova, who is the Director of Division Conference Management and Chair for Multilingualism at UN Geneva. We also have Professor Ghil'ad Zuckermann, Chair of Linguistics and Endangered Languages at the School of Humanities of the University of Adelaide in Australia. He will share with you his perspective on the topic of indigenous languages. And we also have the chance to welcome Dr. Sheena Shah, who is a linguist at the Department of African and Ethiopian Studies at the University of Hamburg in Germany. She will be sharing many interesting information about African languages. But now let's get started. Over to you, Kira.
Great. Thank you so much, Leah, and welcome everyone for joining us in celebrating International Mother Language Day. So hello, bonjour, mahaba, ni hao, здравствуйте, hola. Guten Tag. My mother's German, so I thought I'd throw that in. My name is Kira Kruglikova, and I'm the director of the Division of Conference Management at the United Nations office at Geneva. I'm also the focal point for multilingualism. We are very excited to welcome not only colleagues from Geneva and other duty stations, but everyone who shares our love of languages. We at the UN observe International Mother Language Day every year for 20 years to celebrate and promote linguistic and cultural diversity and multilingualism. Multilingualism is a core value of the United Nations, and it is something that we encounter every day. Being one of the largest conference centers in the world, every year the United Nations office at Geneva welcomes tens of thousands of delegates speaking hundreds of different languages. Of course, these days with COVID, many of these welcomes are hybrid or virtual, much as you are joining us here today. The delegates come to Geneva to work together and find solutions to the world's most pressing challenges. And multilingualism is very important. Indeed, it is key to these multilateral communications. Through multilingualism, the United Nations intergovernmental bodies ensure that critical decisions and documents are understood, observed, implemented, and accepted by the people the United Nations supports. Through multilingualism, the United Nations communicates globally with the most vulnerable populations, brings conflicting parties to the negotiating table, delivers aid, addresses disaster risks, spreads understanding about human rights and fundamental freedoms, and advances understanding about dignity and justice for all. Many of our meetings are conferences held here in the UN in the 6 official languages. Almost all are conducted in the UN's 2 working languages, English and French. Reflecting the diverse world, UN Geneva staff come from more than 100 countries and speak over 70 different languages. We also have several initiatives promoting multilingualism and encouraging people to learn other languages. And just recently, we've added sign language, which is a language in and of itself. Actually, we won't go into sign language. It's a long discussion. These range from language courses to celebrating language days when people have an opportunity to experience the fascinating universe of languages and cultures, as well as courses to help people become fluent in one of the 6 official languages that the UN uses. There are more than 6,000 languages spoken in the world, yet it is estimated that every 2 weeks a language disappears because of the globalization processes. With every disappearing language, the world loses traditions, memories, and unique methods of expression. The United Nations General Assembly proclaimed the period between 2022, this year, and 2032 as the International Decade of Indigenous Languages to raise awareness of the critical status of many Indigenous languages in the world and encourage actions for their preservation, revitalization, and promotion. And it is in that context that today we have Dr. Zuckermann and Dr. Shah with us, renowned experts in Indigenous languages, as Leah had already mentioned. So I'd like at this point to pass the floor to Dr. Zuckermann. Please, sir, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Kira Kruglikova, and also Leah Kotlar for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here. And I understand that we need to ask the audience a question now, right, Leah?
Yes. Thank you, Kira, and thank you, Ghil'ad. So before hearing the very exciting presentation from our guest speakers, we would like you to go again on menti.com and enter the same code. Referring to what Kira just said, we have a question concerning the 6,000 languages spoken around the world. So you can go back on Mentimeter and enter the same code or scan the QR code you can see on the screen. Or check the chat section to directly go on menti.com. So did you know that of the more than 6,000 languages are spoken around the world? It's an impressive number, right? And of the 6,000 languages spoken, could you guess the percentage of those considered endangered? We gave you 4 options with approximate numbers. Could you guess which percentage is appropriate? So let's go back to menti.com for those who could not join earlier. You have all the details on the chat section, and we just wanted to ask you the question you can see on the screen. So we just have, time's up. So I can see that most of you had correct the appropriate percentage. So it is indeed 43% of the 6,000 languages who are considered endangered. But on this matter, I will pass the floor to Ghil'ad to give us more insight. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah. My own question, seeing this beautiful question, is how we might define an endangered language. Because I know endangered languages that have 10 million speakers, and I know some languages with 3,000 speakers only that are not endangered. In fact, I would argue that endangerment has to do with not with number, but with percentage, and not with just a percentage, but with a percentage of the young people, of the kids, so say between 0 and 18, who speak the language natively. The moment we have people who do not speak the language natively, and of course now we can ask what is native speech, what is mother tongue, etc., etc. But what I mean is when you hear my English, which is my 13th language, you can hear that I'm not an English native speaker. I'm not a native English speaker. I have a foreign accent. I might make mistakes, whereas a native speaker, somebody who speaks the language as his or her native tongue, does not make mistakes. Never make mistakes. And you might say, how is it possible? Of course, some people who speak English in England, they make mistakes. Well, actually, they do not. But coming back to the endangerment issue, it would be very interesting to see, but this is probably for another event, what people in the audience, how they define an endangered language. So for example, if a language has 10 million speakers, can it still be endangered? The answer is absolutely yes. If a language only has 1,000 speakers, can it be non-endangered? The answer is absolutely yes. I would like to start my presentation by acknowledging the Aboriginal people who used to own the land where I am currently at. The land is Galinyala, which is known in English as Port Lincoln. It's in Eyre Peninsula, and this is in Australia Australis. You know that in Latin, Australia means south. So I am in South Australia, which is the south of the south. So in Latin, this state of Australia is called Australia Australis, the south of the south. And if I acknowledge the people who are here around me, I need to say, other than Nina Yuwa, which means you good, Nina Yuwa, Nina you are good, Nina Yuwa. I also need to say, Ngari Nyalbu Nagudu Yura Bangalamada Yarda Galgaridi Maburi, Malburi. We know people, Bangala, land, ancient owners. This is how they say literally, we acknowledge and respect the Bangala people as the traditional custodians of the ancestral lands. As you can see, when you translate from the English to Bangala, it is not exactly the same because languages differ. In fact, Bangala, the reason why I could say what I have just said to you is because we are currently reclaiming this sleeping beauty or dreaming beauty. You see, I coined the term sleeping beauty to refer to a language that is not longer spoken, but dreaming beauty is my term for an Australian language that is no longer spoken because of Jukurpa. Jukurpa is called Dreamtime in English, which is a mistranslation, but this is another story. But because of that, dreaming beauty or dreaming sleeping beauty is a language that no one spoke. Unfortunately, Bangala became a sleeping beauty or a dreaming beauty by 1960. And Bangala is a very beautiful language. For example, you have a dual pronoun. So we too, ngadlaga, but I would only use ngadlaga if I'm talking with my sister's child. This is matrilineal. It is based on a woman. Whereas if I'm talking with my brother's child, I will not say ngadlaga, I would say ngarinyi. You see, in Bangala, which is an Aboriginal language that we are currently reviving here in Galinyala, where I'm currently, you have two ways to refer to we two according to whether or not we are associated to each other via our sister, a woman, or via a brother, a man. And in fact, languages differ from each other, not in what they can say, but rather in what they must say. In Bangala, you must define the relationship, the kinship relationship between the speakers before you open your mouth. This is a fascinating insight that linguists have discovered. Languages differ not in what they can say, but rather in what they must say. Now that I have acknowledged the Bangala people whose language we are reviving, and the reason I could do it in Bangala is merely because we are reclaiming this sleeping beauty, I would like to ask several questions today, and we have our helper who can put the questions that I'm going to ask on the screen. So the first question is, why on earth should we invest time and money in reclaiming dead, in quotation marks, or sleeping beauty, or dreaming beauty languages? I'm going to give you today three main reasons. And look, I'm talking spontaneously. This is in my blood. This is in my brain. I don't follow any notes. The only notes that I have now is exactly what my friend has just put. Why on earth should we invest time and money in reviving dead, in quotation marks, languages? I prefer sleeping beauty, dreaming beauty, as I have already said. I'm going to give you three different reasons. The first one is ethical. What is the right thing to do deontologically? The second reason is aesthetic. What is the beautiful thing to do? We are human beings. Beauty is very important to us. And the third reason for why we should reclaim dead languages is utilitarian. What is the beneficial, the useful thing to do for our society? Let me start with the ethical case for language reclamation. And I think this is a very important question. Why revive languages? Because we need to convince taxpayers all over the world, definitely all over the New World, but I have to say there are many endangered and sleeping beauties languages in Europe as well. So it's not only the New World, it's also the Old World. We need to tell them, we might use your tax money for that. So why? The ethical reason is why I dedicate my life to the reclamation of sleeping beauty languages. Deontological justice. These languages, the languages I reclaim, deserve to be reclaimed because they were subject to linguicide. Linguicide means language killing. Just as there is genocide, there is also, or insecticide, when you kill cockroaches, there is also linguicide, language killing. These languages were killed simply by colonization. I'll give you an example from 1843. Anthony Forster, a colonist in Adelaide, where I reside. I'm at the University of Adelaide. I'm I'm endangered languages professor. So endangered that I'm the only such professor in Australia. So endangered does not only modify the languages, it also modifies the only professor who happens to be me. Anthony Forster said, the natives would be sooner civilized if their language was extinct. I repeat, he said that in 1843. So what is it? Almost 180 years ago, right? Yeah, almost 180 years ago. The natives would be sooner civilized if their language was extinct. What does he mean by natives? The Aboriginal people who had been in Australia for at least 50,000 years, walking from Africa. We are all, of course, from Africa, which links to the next presentation when I finish by Dr. Sheena Shah, but they walked, Aboriginal people walked from Africa to Australia 50,000 years ago, arrived in the north, and then walked clockwise and anti-clockwise. And believe it or not, 47,000 years ago, they met where I am right now, Eyre Peninsula. I am right now at the place where 47,000 years ago, and we know it because we have DNA research by friends of mine, they met each other and they said, oh, who are you? What is this? Because it was like at least 3,000 years after they arrived from Africa. Of course, only then, they're not stupid, they went to Uluru and what we call the outback inside South Australia. So he meant the natives, the Aboriginal people, would be sooner civilized, meaning Europeanized. That is what he means by civilized, if the language was extinct. Now, he was nasty, but he was not stupid. I believe that Anthony Forster knew something that many linguists know, or many, I should say, sociolinguists know. What is this? When you lose your language, you lose your cultural autonomy, you lose your intellectual sovereignty, you lose your spirituality, you lose your well-being, you lose your self-esteem, you lose your mental health. He understood it in an ancient way. This was 179 years ago, as I said. And this is the tragedy of linguicide, because language killing is a deontologically horrible tragedy that we linguists, activists, United Nations leaders must take into account. We need to right the wrong of the past. That's the deontological, ethical reason. I would like to move now to the aesthetic reason for language diversity, for having many, many languages in the world. You might say, wait a second, why do we need many languages? We will not understand each other. We need to have only one language to communicate with each other, etc., etc. By the way, this is an obiter dictum. I personally believe that each and every person should be native speaker of 4 languages. International language, currently English, it might change. Well, Esperanto didn't succeed, as you know. The other one is your national language. The third one is your heritage language, which is not the same often as your national language. You can be Albanian in Italy, yeah? Or you can be a Yiddish speaker in Poland or whatever. And the fourth one is the language of your ikigai. What is ikigai? What you're good at, what the world needs, what you love, and what you are paid for. So if you're an opera singer, your 4th native tongue should be Italian. If you're a French chef in a French restaurant, it should be French, etc., etc., etc. Ikigai is, by the way, a Japanese word. Coming back to the aesthetic reason, which is relevant to ikigai because it's a beautiful word. Raison d'être, is one of them, but ikigai is this intersection of the 4 things. So it's kind of a little bit even better than raison d'être. The aesthetic case for language revival is that language revival results in diversity, new diversity, not only the original diversity. I've just heard that a couple of days ago, the last speaker of a dialect of Yagan in Tierra del Fuego between Chile and Argentina unfortunately passed away. I remember when I studied Yagan, there was this beautiful word that I knew the concept it refers to, but I had no idea that there was a signifier, that there was a word for this concept. The concept is something I felt when I was 15 in Israel. It was looking at the other side, looking at another person, hoping that the other person would initiate something that both of us really want to do, but so far nobody has had the guts to initiate. I remember having this feeling, but I did not have a word for it. And then suddenly I studied Yagan and they have a word for it. Mami Sapinatapai. Mami Sapinatapai is exactly that. It's exactly that feeling. Now look how beautiful it is to have a word for that feeling. On the other hand, you have words for concepts that you would have never imagined. For example, in ancient Persian, you have a word nakhur. Nakhur is a camel that will only give milk if her nostrils have been tickled. I know nothing about camels. How should I come with this idea? Look at how aliens look at Hollywood films. They usually look like ugly human beings. What are the chances that an alien would look like an ugly human being? Very, very slim. I believe the world is not infinite. And by the way, you have DNA like 3.5 billion years of evolution. So how can we have an alien who looks like us? It is ludicrous, but it shows you the limits of the anthropomorphic imagination. Now, we want this diversity. We want to have, just as we want koalas, we want kangaroos, we want giraffes, we want many animals, zoodiversity, we also want linguistic diversity. It is simply beautiful. And the third case for language reclamation is the utilitarian case. Language reclamation is beneficial. It's useful to our society. How come? Many, many reasons. The most important one, in my view, is empowerment of mental health. What I'm going to say now is very sad, but this is the fact. There was an article published in 2007 by Lalonde, Chandler, and others in Canada, British Columbia, and they found out that there was a correlation between language loss and youth suicide. They looked at 6 different tribes, Aboriginal tribes in British Columbia. As you know, Aboriginal is not only in Australia, this term, it's also in Taiwan, it's also in Canada. Yeah, it means indigenous, but in Canada they also have First Nations, but also sometimes referred to as Aboriginal people. The tribe who did not lose any language had 0 youth suicides. The tribe who lost the entire language had a lot of youth suicide. And then there was a graph that showed you that there was a correlation between language loss and youth suicide. Apropos linguicide, suicide, self-killing. What I discovered in my language reclamation all over the globe, there is a correlation between reconnecting with your heritage tongue and empowerment, an antidote for self-loathing, an antidote for feeling bad due to the trauma of colonization, loss of land, etc., etc., etc. I received unsolicited emails after the first Bangala reclamation workshop in Galinyala here 11 years ago, exactly where I'm now. I feel liberated. It gives me a purpose in life. This is after the first reclamation workshop of Bangala. Another person told me, our ancestors are happy. Now, I, as an Israeli Jew, would never say my ancestors are happy, but Aboriginal people often say our ancestors are happy, which means that they, the ones who say that, are happy. Language reclamation has a feeling of empowerment. This is the main utilitarian reason. We want our society to be full of happy, empowered people. We don't want to have miserable people. Of course, there are many other utilitarian benefits, and probably I will begin to wrap up because I know that we have limited time, but I will ask you to ask me questions at the end because I'm going to stay awake even though it's very late here. I cannot miss such an opportunity to talk to you, to the United Nations, which I very much acknowledge for the Indigenous Year and for the decade, the UNESCO Decade of Indigenous Languages, etc. There are many other reasons, utilitarian reasons. One of them is bilingualism is actually good for your health, for your medical longevity. When you are bilingual natively, you will get your dementia 4.5 years later. If in your genes it's written dementia at the age of 80, now you're bilingual. Say you're French, English bilingual. Say you're Bangla, Australian bilingual. Say you're Yiddish, Israeli bilingual. You will get your dementia, which is already written in your genes, 4.5 years later. This is not a joke. This is a medical research. I would like to very briefly respond to the three brief questions. Should we financially compensate people for the loss of their native tongues? Absolutely yes. Why do we compensate people for the loss of land, but we never compensate them for the loss of language? Language, in my view, is more important than the specific land where you were born. When I make a trip down memory lane, I need a passport, I need a visa, and I need a certificate that there are no terrorists around, because I grew up in the southern part of Israel, and every weekend we went to Sinai Desert. It was Israel at the time, now it is Egypt. Not a problem. I, in fact, live not even in the country where I was born. However, if you tell me you should never be able to speak your mother tongue, as, by the way, happened to my friends, my Stone Generation's friends, this is much more severe than the loss of land. So we should financially compensate people for the loss of their native tongue. Should indigenous languages be defined as official languages, for example, of Australia? Absolutely yes. Australia needs to learn from Aotearoa. What is Aotearoa? New Zealand. Aotearoa in Maori means the land of the long white cloud. Some of my Maori friends reanalyze it as the land of the wrong white crowd. Wrong white crowd instead of long white cloud. In Aotearoa, there are two official languages. Surprise, Te Reo Maori, the language Maori, and the sign language, the New Zealand Sign Language. And here I'm corresponding with Kira Kruglikova because she mentioned the deaf language. English is not a de jure official language in New Zealand. Surprise. Australia should define 400 languages as official languages of Australia. These are 400 Aboriginal languages. Today, only 12 to 3% are alive and kicking, which means 100% of kids speak the language. We have also two additional languages like Creole languages. And the final question, was, should we erect bilingual or multilingual signs? And the answer is absolutely yes. We should go all over the world and see exactly what you can see in Wellington, which is the capital of New Zealand. Everything is in English, which is de facto, not de jure, as well as in Te Reo Maori, the language Maori. Unfortunately, this is not the case in Australia. We should learn from Singapore, in which you have 4 official languages, which is, of course, Mandarin and Tamil and Malay and English. So all the signs must be in 4 languages. Sometimes when you travel in Australia, you see signs in German, in Chinese, in Japanese for the tourists, but not signs in the local Aboriginal language. I would like to tell you, if you know of people, and this is my last sentence before Leah stops me, if you know of people who are good at languages, they are talented at languages, urge them not only to study languages of economic benefit like Chinese or Arabic or Spanish, tell them that they should also dedicate their time to the studying of an indigenous / minority / endangered language, because there are there are thousands of tribes who would like somebody to come and to help them. Not all of them are linguistically advanced. Not all of them studied linguistics at the university. This is something that we are trying to do. If you know of somebody who is passionate about language, there is an ikigai. There is this intersection, as I mentioned, between what you're good at, what you love, what the world needs, and what you're paid for. And this ikigai is called revivalistics. Revivalistics. So I recommend revivalistics to you. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to address you, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Zuckermann, for this very insightful presentation. We will put again the link to access the resource guide where you will find the book the Professor Zuckermann just mentioned. Do not hesitate to put your questions or share your thoughts in the chat. But now I would like to give the floor to Dr. Sheena Shah. Over to you.
Thank you very much, and welcome everyone. Today is a day about our languages, and I saw earlier that many of you mentioned the languages you spoke. We had diverse languages: French, Spanish, Hindi, Tamil, Gujarati, etc. Today I wanted to share insights from Southern Africa, which is where I work. So I hope you can all see my slides. And I'm going to be talking today about maintaining ancestral languages in Southern Africa with a focus on South Africa, Lesotho, Namibia, and Botswana. I wanted to start by asking you all 3 questions. What are the reasons for ancestral languages to be abandoned? Why should they be recognized and maintained? And can they be maintained? Maybe some of you already have some thoughts on possible answers to these questions. Feel free to share them in the chat if you'd like. We'll refer back to these questions throughout the presentation. I'll be presenting various examples over the next 10 to 15 minutes. And the examples in this presentation are from 3 languages. The first language, in South Africa, which is spoken as a first language by 1 speaker only, and is acquired as an additional language by some children and adults. Sephuthi in Lesotho in South Africa, which is spoken as a first language by about 5,000 speakers. And the last language, Kwe, in Namibia, Botswana, and South Africa, which is spoken as a first language by about 6,000 speakers and as an additional language by roughly the same number of speakers. We saw earlier that there are about 6,000 languages in the world. Africa is a linguistically diverse continent with roughly 2,000 languages. However, many of these languages are severely endangered and they're going to become extinct in the foreseeable future. These endangered languages are spoken by marginalized communities. So let's think back to the first question I asked. Why do speakers abandon their ancestral languages? Most speakers of endangered languages are struggling on a daily basis to fulfill the 5 basic needs. This is food, water, clothing, sleep, and shelter. Language is therefore not a top priority. Most speakers of endangered languages are marginalized in national contexts. They're excluded from decision-making processes, also concerning themselves. They're not recognized by central governments. They're exposed to political pressure towards abandoning their ancestral languages and shifting to the regionally or nationally dominant languages of the country. For example, in the South African context, the apartheid regime enabled farmers to force their laborers to abandon their ancestral languages and switch to Afrikaans. Most speakers of endangered languages experience also social pressure. All parents want what they consider to be the best for their children. And in these contexts, this could mean for them a language shift at home to a dominant language because often this provides better job opportunities. I'd like to share some examples. The first one is from Katrina Esau, who you see on this slide, spoke Zulu as her first language as a child. But she and all her family members were forced to abandon the language completely and speak Afrikaans instead. The second example is from Sephuthi. Sephuthi is not officially recognized by the Lesotho government and is therefore not used in governmental educational institutions. Children are taught in Sesotho and English, which are both foreign languages and which, at least in the 2 river valleys where they're spoken, are both acquired as additional languages through formal education. The third example is from Kwe. Kwe is still acquired as a first language by roughly 5,000 speakers in Namibia. But in Botswana, Kwe is replaced in many Kwe settlements with Setswana, which is the national and dominant language of the country, spoken as a first language by almost 80% of the population. Trusha Oroji is a glimpse into the living conditions of the Kwe linguistic minority of Namibia. I've asked the organizers to share the link of this short film in the chat. Here you can see how hunter-gatherers were deprived of their natural resources and how their survival was threatened by the destruction of water resources by in-migrating pastoralists. While Kwe is still the community language in Namibia, the physical survival of the community is threatened. Now that we've considered some reasons why speakers might abandon their ancestral languages, let's move on to the second question. Why should ancestral languages be recognized? In order to empower marginalized communities, the ancestral languages should be recognized and supported. Being allowed to speak and being allowed to be taught in one's own language raises self-esteem. It levels political and social inequalities. And ultimately, it provides better economic opportunities for the future. Here's an example from Sephuthi in Lesotho. I'm personally involved in supporting language documentation and revitalization efforts of the Sephuti speakers in Lesotho. Here on this slide, you can see a newspaper article about the efforts of the community for recognition of Sephuti on a national level in Lesotho. There are also other reasons why ancestral languages should be maintained. We heard earlier that there are concepts in languages which are gone once the languages are gone. So for example, in Khmer, there are concepts which reflect and capture unique aspects of the environment and experiences in living in and with nature of former hunter-gatherers. These will disappear if the languages are no longer spoken. Let me give you an example. Yi means tree. Yi also means wood. And Yi also means medicinal plants in the Khmer language. With that, the Khmer conceptualize their environment according to their needs, which differ fundamentally from those living in Western living conditions. You can get a glimpse into the importance of Yi for the Khmer by watching the short film, which has been shared in the chat by the organizers. Now let's move on to the last question. Now that we've considered some reasons why ancestral languages should be maintained, let's think a little about how they can be maintained. Important are language documentation and maintenance work. Language documentation refers to attempts to create a comprehensive and lasting record of the linguistic practices of a speech community. But most importantly, my belief is that for language documentation and maintenance work to succeed, it should be community-based and community-driven. So then one question for a linguist like me is, what possible role can linguists take on? Linguists can support community members in their efforts. I'd like to start by sharing an example from Sephuti. I'm working on a project where we train members of the community in language documentation methods. In this slide, you can see some images from a workshop which was held 3 months ago. I'm actually returning to Lesotho later this week to facilitate further training. One of the previous projects I was involved in was Ngu. Community members are the driving forces behind reviving the language. And among them is Claudia Snyman, the granddaughter of Katrina Assau. She's the one you can see holding the book here. Many community members were formerly deprived of their ethnic identity, being subsumed under the apartheid category colored. But now they take pride in identifying with the past and calling themselves San or Bushmen. On this slide, you can see some of the educational materials which we produced together with Claudia and Katrina, including alphabet chart and a Ngu reader. We're very happy that the Ngu reader became a testimony of their claims for their linguistic and cultural recognition. This reader is being used in community-based teaching efforts carried out by Katrina and Claudia. So back to the question, can endangered languages be maintained? I would say that the answer is yes, as long as people still continue to speak them. In the example of Ngu, you see on this slide Katrina with the late Ghil'ad and Anki in 2012 as they converse in Ngu. Only Katrina is still alive and tries to pass on her language to her family and other community members. For the last 30 years, she's dedicated her life to keep her language alive. Even though Ngu is not likely to become the first language of the other community members, there's a strong movement to revitalize the use of the language as a community language among them. I'd like to end with an example from Sephuti, using the words of Letsatso Komertsi, a Sephuti language activist. He composed and recited the poem you're about to hear at the International Mother Language Day celebrations of the National University of Lesotho 3 years ago. And the poem you're about to hear describes the pain he experienced in growing up speaking the marginalized, suppressed language Sephuti. And he explains why the struggle for the official recognition of the language and its use in formal education is so important.
Can you hear?
I hope everyone was able to hear the recording. I see in the chat that there might have been some technical difficulties, but I also see a lot of thumbs up. So I'm assuming that most of you could hear that. And for those of you who couldn't, it'll be in the recording, which is going to be shared tomorrow. So I'd like to now end by thanking you all for joining us today to celebrate our languages. I also wanted to thank the communities that I've been privileged to work with. Thanks to them for sharing their knowledge and insights with me over many years. To our funders, SADILA and EODP, to the Living Language Land Initiative, to my universities, and last but not least, to the fantastic team organizing today's event. Thank you all, and we're looking forward to the questions that you have for us.
Thank you so much, Sheena and Ghil'ad, for this very interesting presentation. There are so many important elements to talk about, and I believe it's time for our audience to have the opportunity to ask their questions and exchange directly with you. If you wish to speak with the speakers, use the raise hands feature that you can find at the top of your screen. For everyone, respect and comfort, again, we will ask you to make sure to be in a quiet area before raising your hands and to be given the floor to speak. And don't hesitate as well to ask your questions or give your thoughts in the chat section. I have a personal question to ask you, maybe Ghil'ad and Sheena. How many languages do you speak? Maybe Ghil'ad, you want to speak first?
I'm fluent. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Leah?
Yes,
Yeah,
I can hear you.
I can hear very well. I heard everything except the video. It's weird. I don't know why my Microsoft Teams is a little bit weird. I am fluent in 13 languages, 1-3. However, I can read maybe like dozens of languages. I mean, if you give me enough time, I can translate, like from, I don't know, many other languages. And my books, when I write books, I mention maybe hundreds of languages, not necessarily languages I'm fluent in, but linguistics, it's a little bit like psychiatry, like if you go to a psychiatrist, yeah, and say you suffer from something, the psychiatrist tells you, oh, look, you suffer from that, and he said, how do you know? Have you ever been like whatever? So it's a little bit like that. I mean, you can analyze languages even though you're not fluent in them. But I'm fluent in 13, and as I said, English is my 13th.
It's an impressive number. Wow. What about you, Sheena?
Yeah, that's a really impressive number. So for me, it's definitely less than 13. I wish it was 13. My mother and father tongue, I should add, is Gujarati. So Gujarati is a language which is spoken in the state of Gujarat in India. But my family, well, my parents are not from India, they're from Kenya. So the variety of Gujarati that we speak is quite different to the variety you find in India. And I always find when I go to India that people sometimes have a bit of difficulty understanding me because I mix Swahili words in my Gujarati, and that's normal if you've learned the East African variety of Gujarati. So that's my mother tongue. And then I learned English. I grew up in England, and I learned English when I went to school. But I was in a class or in a school where most of us didn't speak English as our first language. And through kind of hanging out with friends, you pick up a lot from other people's languages. And I've been always interested in kind of African languages, I think partly because of my family background. And a number of the languages I've worked with, I speak to some degree. So I wouldn't say I'm fluent in all of them, but I definitely have conversational ability. And I currently live in Germany, and this is a language which we speak at home. My husband is actually from the German minority in Italy. So we have a kind of mixture of German, Italian, English, and then when I'm mad, it's Gujarati. So it's kind of a mixed match, but it's fun.
It's super interesting.
You have a husband, actually your husband is from La Deutsche Vita. That's exactly that. So is it like Brixen, Bressanone, or where is he from?
Exactly. So he's from Südtirol, from South Tyrol, and he's from a valley called Arntal, Valle Aurina. So everything there is in 2 languages. And in his particular area, it's a little bit more German than Italian. So the people living there speak Italian, but it's often like foreign language ability. So it's not fluent, but he then spent a lot of time in kind of real Italy, in Milan, and then learned kind of fluent Italian.
Cool, super cool. Thank you so much. I can see that someone would like to speak to you in the attendees. Namon Deepchain, would you like to ask your question to our speakers? Please unmute yourself.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. Actually, it was really insightful. I had a question regarding, so when we talk about preservation of languages, it happens sometimes, as Sheena also mentioned right now, that when you introduce another language to a culture where another language is spoken, so let's say for me, it's Hindi, and when you introduce English to it, organically it happens that certain words from Hindi seep into English, and from English certain words seep into Hindi. In that manner, how do we preserve a language when the languages are constantly changing and evolving by combining with each other? So what are your thoughts about that?
Should I start?
Absolutely, go for it.
I love what I call the viral orgy that happens when languages affect each other. I remember raspberry when it penetrated Hindi as rasbhari, which is full of juice. Rasbhari, correct me if I'm wrong, is full of juice, but it sounds like raspberry, so it's a phonosemantic matching. Now, this happens in Chinese. You have many words in Chinese that are trying to imitate the sound of the English or the American, but actually they use domestic elements. For example, shangna, sound receive. It means sonar, sound navigation and ranging in Chinese. What is beautiful about Japanese is that when I go to Japan, every sentence I hear, I can notice an Americanism. For example, I remember listening to Junichiro Koizumi, or Koizumi Junichiro. He was the prime minister with the long hair. I know it because it was at a time when there were internet cafes, and they used to call your name when the when the internet was available. And I always introduced myself as Junichiro Koizumi. And when they, there were thousands of people, and when suddenly say Koizumi Junichiro, everybody was looking and they thought it was a prime minister, but it was a foreigner. Now he gave a speech. And he said in Japanese, I'm not going to speak to you in Japanese now, but he said, we should fight the Americanisms that penetrate our masu-komi. He used the term masu-komi, which means mass communication, without even realizing that it was from English. I have no problem whatsoever with languages affecting other languages. The best language with this regard is English. 29% of English lexis is French. 29% of English lexis is Latin. 58% of English lexicon is Romance. Do you understand? I mean, like when and of course the Germanic component is almost nothing. 20 some. There was when Académie Française published against weekend. We should not say weekend. You should not say computer. You should. Somebody who is very clever, I forgot his name, wrote a letter against it in English, only using Frenchisms. So instead of saying begin, they said commence. Do you understand? Instead of saying keen or sharp, they said perspicacious. Only using French, Latin lexical items. So I love this orgy. I'm not afraid of languages interfering with other languages. On the contrary, I personally love it. I don't think that this is what makes the language endangered. I think that language endangerment, as I see it, is when the language disappears completely.
And I can only agree with what Ghil'ad has said. So as linguists, we're really interested in how people actually speak. We're interested in language change is normal. And we're not trying to be purist or archaic, and language is a living thing. So one of the things that I found often when we work with communities is that they will, when you're looking for speakers of a language, they'll send you to the person who is an elder, most knowledgeable, but might not be using the language as actually the kids are using or the community as a whole are using. And we want to represent how people are speaking as they speak, not how they might have spoken 50 years ago or 100 years ago. So it's normal, and it's something to really preserve. So when you're thinking about maintenance work or documentation, it's important to think about language as it's used today by people.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for these super interesting answers. There are so many questions and interesting ones to answer, but we are a bit out of time. I would just pick 2 or 3 more. The first one, maybe, how many language can the normal person learn in his lifetime? Would you like to answer? Yes, go
Yeah,
ahead.
I mean, if you, Sheena, unless you want to be the first, but I'm.
Go for it.
Okay, so I think that it's very important to realize, and I saw this question by somebody on the chat, and it's related to this question: who is a good language learner? And when we say good language learner, we mean foreign language learner, because bear in mind, your native tongue, it's very easy to get. I mean, you don't need to be clever. I remember in Israel, we said in London, every 12-year-old, it doesn't matter how clever he is or she is, they speak English perfectly, which is true. So who is a good foreign language learner? In my view, you need 7 characteristics. The first one, you need to be mathematical. Second, you need to be musical. Third, outstanding memory, maybe photographic or sometimes auditory, outstanding memory. Fourth, IQ, high IQ. Fifth, high EQ, emotional intelligence. Sixth, shamelessness, euthanasia as a generalization, youth in Asia suffer from, not from guilt, but from shame, losing face. Not good for language learning. You should be shameless. You should make mistakes. You should not be afraid of making fool of yourself. And the seventh, which is the most important thing, I believe, is motivation. Say your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your whatever is of a different language and you want or you do not want to speak to their parents. If you want to speak to their parents then, or to him in his, then it's a good motivation. If you want to study Friedrich Nietzsche, you must study German. There is no other way, etc., etc. If you have these 7 characteristics, you can acquire as many languages as you want. Of course, there is unfortunate, currently we still live until 120 years. In Jewish circles, we say bis 120, may you live until 120. I guess that soon we might need to change it to bis 180 because we live actually longer and longer life. There is a joke in Jewish tradition. What do you wish a person on his 120th birthday? Because that's supposed to be the last day. And the answer is have a nice day. Instead of saying happy birthday, just say have a nice day. So the point of the matter is that you can acquire 50 languages fluently. I always joke, the first 10 are difficult, but after the first 10, it's very easy because you use the links that you already have in order to remember, to mnemonicize new words. So when I study Japanese, I already know Israeli. Sakana means, in Israeli, it means danger. But in Japanese, it means fish. So of course, fish can be very dangerous. Look what happened to Steve Irving in Australia. So sakana, I can link it to another language, etc., etc. This is called mnemonics. So there is no and except, of course, 120 years currently, hopefully soon to become 1,000 years.
And just to add one small point, most people in the world are multilingual. So this idea of speaking 1 or 2 languages is not the norm. So if we think about people, for example, some of the people I work with in Africa, they on a daily basis use 5 languages. 1 language or 2 languages might be used more at home. And then if you go to the market, you use another language. And this is something that they acquired naturally in the particular context where they use this language. And so I think, as Ghil'ad said, it's possible that there is no actual number you can give. The sky's the limit.
Of course, when you speak to your horse, you have a different language, so it all depends on the context. I totally agree with you. That's a very good point. In Australia, Aboriginal people used to speak 8 languages. Unfortunately, nowadays, they have become just like Aussies, monolingual as a generalization. The monolingual mindset is a very bad thing for humanity. I could give you thousands of examples of how bad it is.
Thank you very much. There is a question for you, Sheena, in the chat about your Ethiopian studies in Hamburg. Could you tell us more about this?
So the department I belong to is the African and Ethiopian Studies department. And for Ethiopian studies, it's about language, culture, history. So the nice thing about being in an area studies department is it's not just about language because they see that all of these other aspects are interrelated. So we consider, as I mentioned, history, culture, geography, etc. And this is what also the students learn when they take courses in our department. They learn about all aspects of African and Ethiopian studies.
Super cool.
I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, thank you. I think if we will also leave our email address and forward you more questions if the attendees have some more. I see also Nora Kamis who would like to say something. Nora, please, I give you the floor.
Yeah, hello. So I would like to know tips to acquire fourth or fifth language. Tips that I can adopt it every day. Thank you.
Sheena, would you like to answer first?
Yes. So I think it was similar to some of the points that Ghil'ad mentioned before. And I would say the most important is motivation. So you have to really want to do it, be motivated. I found, so when I was learning, for example, German, I found a bit every day helped. So not to kind of cram something, once a week, but really this kind of continuous learning, and to actually go to the country, live in the country where the language is spoken. So there's only so much that you can do with apps and textbooks, etc. But a language is for speaking. And I think the best way is to really go to the country, speak to people, make mistakes, don't be scared to make mistakes. And I would say that that's, for me, at least in my personal experience, what really kind of worked.
Thank you very much, Nora and Sheena, for this. Maybe one last question. I'm so sorry we will not be able to answer all of them, but concerning learning a language, what are your recommendations for how to learn a language without getting caught up in speaking, writing perfectly? What strategies do you use to learn and practice? Do you have any recommendations or tips to give concerning this question?
Are you asking me, Leah?
Yes, you can go. You can answer that.
It depends which language you would like to learn and how far it is from the languages you already know. I mean, and it also depends on whether or not you're single, you're available. I mean, the best thing is to have somebody with whom you're intimate in another language, and then you can learn their language. I also believe in, you teach your language to them, and they teach your language to you, kind of one-on-one, like a tutorial. Mnemonics, you make up many weird stories to remember things. So I taught the Bangla the word for black, yuga. Now, they're English speakers. They did not know yuga. But I told them, look, yuga, do you know Mahatma Gandhi? Of course, yeah, everybody heard of Mahatma Gandhi, by the way, in Cape Town, right? Sorry, in Johannesburg, not in Cape Town. I mean, he lived in South Africa for a long time. Mahatma Gandhi, what color is he? So they say, oh yeah, he's black. But what did he always do? Say, oh, he did yoga. Oh, yoga. Now look, yoga, black, yuga. In Bangla, there is no O, it's U. It's I, A, U. There is no E and there is no O. There are only 3 vowels. So yoga becomes yuga. So now you have a mnemonic that is, yuga for black. In Bangla, because we are talking about hunter-gatherers, we only have 3 numbers: Guma, Gudara, Gaba. 1, 2, 3. That's it. When you kill a kangaroo, you don't have an abattoir in which you have 1,000 kangaroos and you need to count them. You just kill 1 or 2 or max 3, you eat it, and then for 2 weeks you don't need to eat anything. So why should you have numbers? I mean, we invented numbers in order to count wheat, etc., etc. So how shall we remember Guma, Gudara, Gaba? Yeah, Gaba, there is a very famous stadium in Brisbane called Gaba. No, this is something Australian. And you need to remember there are 3 teams, there is 2 teams and one referee. Right? So, okay, so Gaba is 3, etc. So you need to invent stories that will make your life easier to remember lexical items. When it comes to grammar, then, as I said earlier, you need to be mathematical, musical, memory, etc. So you might be able to improve your musicality, to improve your mathematicity, and indirectly, you will also improve your linguistic abilities. But the most important thing, and this is in correspondence with what Sheena perspicaciously said, immersion. You need to immerse, you need to find somebody, you find a community, you need to go there to speak, to have daily life in the language rather than just to have it as a theoretical enterprise. It's not theoretical. You need to dirty your hands shamelessly.
And I think what you might also find is that you might make a lot of progress at the beginning. So the early milestones are easier to reach, and then it gets tricky. So I think a key point is just to remain motivated and find associations with the language and things you like to do. So if you really enjoy cooking and you're learning Italian, try and listen to cooking recipes or watch Italian soaps or something. One thing or maybe not. One thing I found, I've worked on languages which were very different to languages I knew previously. So some of the click using languages, and I struggled at the beginning to do the right pronunciations. And it took me several months before I could produce all the many, many different click consonants. And there again, it was this immersion, just living with the communities, not being scared to make mistakes. And I think as adults, sometimes we're really scared that, if we say a little bit wrong, how is it going to come across? But I think that's one big thing, trying to overcome this feelings of anxiety and making mistakes, and understanding that it's a journey and it takes time, and it's a lifetime journey in a way, right? Like you're always, even with English, which I've spoken since I was 5, I'm still learning new things every day.
Yeah, this is something that happens to all of us, I think, almost all of us, when we want to learn a new language.
It's funny because Sheena mentioned Italian cuisine. As it happened, I've just come back from a place, a restaurant, and I asked what is the soup of the day, and she told me it's a milestone soup. Do you know what she meant? Milestone soup. Anybody knows what she meant? I cannot hear you, Leah.
Think you will have to tell us.
Well, I told her, excuse me, milestone? I mean, what is milestone? I mean, it was not written anywhere, but of course she saw it somewhere. And then I said, oh, wait, do you mean minestrone? Minestrone. Yes. And she said, oh, yes, yeah, if you pronounce it like that. But what she said was milestone soup. And of course, what is interesting here, and this is a very good example that happened to me just today. Minestrone is a cognate with the English word minister, because minestrare is to serve, like to administer. Minister, like yes minister or the prime minister, is actually a cognate with minestrone. Now, just imagine that this monolingual mindset waitress made this etymological connection, then of course you would say, oh, minestrone, we serve it like the ministers, they serve us, right? We don't serve the ministers, they should serve us, etc. So this is just an example of mnemonic, which at this time, in fact, is the real etymology. It's not just yuga and yoga, which are not etymologically related, but here minestrone, which she unfortunately called milestone, is related to administer.
Thank you very much for this. I think we have learned many things today. Thanks to all of you. Thank you very much for your participation. And if you wish to ask more questions, our speakers left their email addresses. Thank you again to our free speakers, and thanks to our brilliant producers behind the scene, Alexandra, Maria, Natalie, Nivert, Ning, and Daisy. We have many learning sessions coming up in the next month, so don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter to find out the details for joining us. You can also follow the library on Facebook and on Twitter and Facebook for a range of resources and fascinating documents from the library and archives. On another note, we have a session on March 17th with a trainer from Microsoft on how to use the accessible features developed on Microsoft Teams and Office 365. If you're interested in learning more about using these features in your daily work, feel free to join us. As you know, we love to get your feedback, so at the end of today's session, you will see a QR code that you can scan to give us feedback, or email us at commons@un.org. The email is in the chat as well. Now we will end with a short video showing the library doors closing, but we will be back soon, and we hope we will meet you again. Take care and bye for now.